Good afternoon. Welcome to our latest episode of Engagement Experts 101. This is our live podcast where we cover a variety of HR and people topics. My name is Stephen Huerta, and as usual, I'll be your host today. In our last session on the topic of empathy and compassionate leadership, there was a question at the very end of our Ask Me Anything section regarding neurodiversity, which got me thinking. Seeing as April is Autism Awareness Month, I thought a perfect way to contribute would be to have a session completely dedicated to the topic of neurodiversity. If you're not familiar with the topic, neurodiversity is the viewpoint that brain differences are normal rather than deficits. Research shows that diverse perspectives drive better business outcomes, and that when people feel a sense of belonging at work, they're more creative, healthier, and more engaged. Organizations are increasingly working toward widening employee perspectives to embrace diversity of thought and creating more inclusive work environments. Over the last few years, companies have also caught on to the fact that neurodivergent talent make up approximately 15 to 20% of the workforce. That number is way larger than I thought. And this group has experienced unemployment or underemployment rates of up to 80 to 85%. On this show, we've talked a lot about the impact technology has had on jobs, the workplace, and the war for talent. And for technical talent, this war has been particularly fierce. The interesting thing is that neurodiverse individuals are often naturally gifted in technical areas like mathematics, data science, machine learning, and software engineering. However, stigma, lack of awareness, or lack of appropriate infrastructure can result in exclusion for this group of employees. But for the companies that make their workplaces neurodiverse friendly, there's a huge opportunity to tap into a new channel for technical talent. This is what we'll be digging into today. Before we jump into the conversation, I want to remind you all of a few housekeeping items. We will kick off the session with a quick poll that will allow you to provide some real-time input into the discussion. From there, we will have a short 20 to 30-minute conversation with our amazing guest, whom I'll introduce shortly. Then we'll tee up our Ask Me Anything, our AMA section, which will allow you to ask questions directly to today's speaker. As always, this discussion is for you, so please drop questions in the Zoom at any point in time. I'll make sure we get back to those and answer as many questions as we can. So with that said, let's get started. My colleague Oksana will be launching a quick poll. Please share your feedback, as we'll come back to this later into the discussion. For now, I'm really excited to share our guest, who our guest is today. He's a thought leader on this topic. He's been on 60 Minutes and a variety of media outlets talking about today's topic. He's also a friend and former colleague of mine. I'm so thrilled to have you today. Welcome, Hiren Shukla. How are you doing?
Stephen, I'm great. And as I told some friends and family when you and I crossed paths after 20 years, I said, this is a conversation that has to happen. So thanks for having me today.
20 years. Yeah, time flies when you're having fun. But I was saying, the Hiren that the Stephen that Hiren got to work with 20 years ago is very different. But it's been amazing to watch your career progress. And I've had the fortune of seeing this evolution. But before we jump into our conversation, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us your story. How did you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, Stephen, thanks. So, my journey through the lens of transformational leadership really starts with a sense of belonging, which I think all of us in some way, shape, or form struggle with. And as an individual who came to the US with my family escaping genocide, I was born in East Africa, and there was a very famous, infamous Asian expulsion that was happening. It was leave or else. And coming to the US and growing up in New York and saying, well, am I African? Am I Indian? Am I American? What am I? And how do I fit in? How do other people see me? How do I identify myself? That journey through a 25-year career in professional services and consulting really led to some very interesting interactions and opportunity for reflection. Even when I went to India, for example, and I spent 5 years there, I was kind of looked at like, you seem to be Indian, but not really. And by the way,
different.
yeah, and your English is really good. I'm like, that's because I grew up in New York. But, this opportunity for belonging and equity, which I think is where diversity and inclusion evolves to. For me, Stephen, as a transformation professional, thinking about how do you create innovation capacity? How do you reimagine the future? Where is this agile and resilient workforce going to come from? And this was 7 years ago. And we all know the last 2 years has only exacerbated the need for agility and resiliency. We felt it at the individual level. Our organizations, our communities have felt it at a macro level. And that opportunity to think about new sources of talent and how do you build innovation capacity is where my intersection with this amazing topic of neurodiversity, for which I confess I had no prior knowledge, connection. I have no personal connection to this, but it resonates so much. And I think, Stephen, with you, talking with you and hopefully with your audience today, we all are purpose-driven. And when you strike that nerve of being purpose-driven is where you unlock the power of human potential.
In the interesting thing, what our audience doesn't know is we started our careers in a rogue HR consulting group within the tax practice at Ernst Young, a public accounting firm. And so this is quite the career shift from, those days 20 years ago. And, it clearly has gone extremely well for you. And so when you started this work, did you think that this topic would get you on 60 Minutes and some of these other shows you've been on?
Yeah, it's Stephen, it's amazing. And, by the way, I had to show my wife and daughters the selfie with Anderson Cooper because they didn't like, no, they were like, you were just flashed on the screen on CB. I'm like, no, I was really with Anderson Cooper. This was an organic script that I have to believe is meant to be. You don't just stumble into an area where you find that your own challenges with belonging, you now as a leader can reflect that and you see others and you say, I have an opportunity and an obligation, not only to open that door, but as you said, diverse teams will always outperform less diverse teams. No one argues with this, right? But how do you prove this, particularly when the diversity is invisible? And this is this population that we're talking about, where we often know it's diagnoses. We would bring it back to dyslexia, autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. But that sense of belonging, where you really bring, your whole self to work, this is where the power of inclusion is so important and so needed in today's world.
Yeah. And I love everything. I'm buying what you're selling. And I love, I'm a big believer. I'm a former diversity officer before I left my corporate career into entrepreneurship. And so I also share the passion. But, these conversations, it felt like, we were those that practice, that are practitioners were almost cheerleaders for like a decade. It seems as though things have started taking off. And so was there a moment or an inflection point when everything seemed to change in the last year or two?
Yeah. This is the perfect storm, Stephen, where the race for talent, the absolute urgency for transformation, which is really what I do at work. I'm a transformation leader. And it's workforce transformation, it's digital transformation, it's skills transformation, all combined with the commitment around diversity, equity, and inclusion. The last 2 years, you look on LinkedIn, how many C-suite commitments do we see that we say, words are not enough. These have to convert to action. And all of this leads to the broader sustainability or ESG agenda, the environmental, social, and governance agenda, a lot of focus, which is needed on the environmental side, right? Climate change. What about the S, the social pillar, which is our organizations' relationships with their communities, with their supply chain, with not just shareholders, but with stakeholders? And Stephen, this is the perfect storm where thinking about inclusion not as a nice to do and, oh, that's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. But thinking about exponential benefit that you get when you include fringe talent that has a hard time getting in, and all of a sudden, instead of assimilating this talent, you're amplifying their strengths. And we're finding, I've now worked with over 100 companies who say, these are C-suite folks, and from chief information security officers to CIOs, who say, I need to transform and accelerate my agenda. Hiren, are you telling me there's a way through the lens of neurodiversity where talent, technology drives transformation? And we're saying, yes, we've actually already proved this out. So, Stephen, yeah, this is the perfect time to be talking about this.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. And I think, there are so many things that I already want to jump into. Before we do that, let's take a look at the quick poll results from earlier. So, all right. So here we go. My company currently has a focus on neurodiversity. The vast majority are in the disagree to strongly disagree bucket. Does that surprise you at all? I mean, it's honestly not surprising to me, having had to do research and as a former diversity practitioner. This is somewhat of a new topic for me. Is that what you're seeing just in a general sense?
Yeah, Stephen, I think that this is not surprising at all. And B, this is exactly the reason why we go from awareness and education to engagement and implementation, because you look at the next question, and I know you're going to get to it.
Yeah.
This is actually leading up to that journey.
Right. And it's a resounding, I can see the connection between neurodiversity and creating value for the business. With this, I think it is, with this segment of diversity, it's particularly clear when you talk about the talent opportunity here. And so this one isn't surprising to me. The last question, our organization provides a psychologically safe environment where all groups can succeed. This is kind of a mixed bag here. We have some agrees, but we also have neither agree nor disagree, and some disagrees here. We're going to talk a lot about the importance that psychological safety plays into neurodiversity. And so this one isn't a surprise to me at all. I think this is just a broader challenge for companies.
I 100% agree. Stephen, why is 60% plus of the existing workforce thinking about other work and saying, do I really want to be here? I think this comes down to, is there a deliberate effort around psychological safety that says, Hiren, Stephen, when you come to work, even on your bad days, even the days that are really bad for you, we got you. It's okay. We know you're not going to be your best, but we're going to work through the ups and the downs together. You don't have to pretend. I think the last 2 years, which we now, on Zoom, the doorbell rings, your dog jumps into your lap. I mean, all kinds of things. This is real life. And I think psychological safety today, its value is greater than ever. Its need is what's going to turn the great resignation into the great recognition. Are you recognizing your workforce? Because if you are, not just in monetary and other benefits, but are you recognizing their needs and their humanity? I think this is where psychological safety, it will be the differentiator.
Yeah, one of my post-COVID kind of new normal questions that I ask my employees as a manager, as a leader, I have to set the precedent for, how are we creating a psychologically safe environment? And my go-to question in one-on-ones is always, are you okay? And I feel as though if my employees are comfortable telling me like, yeah, answering that question, which is a quite personal question. Like, are you okay? Like, am I okay in my personal life, at work? And so, you know, if my employees, I feel like they are giving me genuine, honest answers to that question, I feel like I'm hitting the mark, at least, you know, at the base level of creating a psychologically safe environment. But there's so much more that we need to dig into. Are you ready to jump into the conversation? All right, let's go. Let's do this. So I want to start with the basics. So what in your definition, the way that you look at the topic, what is neurodiversity, and why should companies be focused on this topic?
Yeah. So thanks, Stephen, for this, because some level setting is important. The vocabulary is changing on this, and it's evolving, I should say. So think about neurodiversity like biodiversity, okay? It includes all of us. Neurodiversity happens to be the realm of cognitive differences in the world, which means all of us have a thinking style, a social style, a communication style. It is approximated 80 to 90% of the world converges in thinking style, social style, communication style. This is the neurotypical population, for which I would be considered to be a part of, okay? It's estimated, and diagnosis is all over the place, so it's hard to get into, are we talking 10% of the population? Are we talking 20% of the population? But a larger portion, Stephen, than like you, I would have never imagined, is the neurodivergent or neurodistinct population. So these are the two components of neurodiversity. The neurodivergent population has an inherent hardwired variance in social style, thinking style, communication style. Some can be dramatic, others can be so light you would never know this. But it's an invisible condition, and neurodiversity is the umbrella term that captures all of it, that says, are we recognizing, acknowledging, and supporting all these different thinking, social, and communication styles that are then able to create value in the world?
And so I have to imagine, I think it's safe to say that the pandemic, the last 2 years, have affected all of us, right? I'm curious, like how did the pandemic affect the neurodiverse, which is inclusive of the neurodivergent and the neurodistinct population? How was this group affected?
Yeah, I think similar to how most of us have been affected, this sense of isolation is probably we all estimate or can guess the ongoing mental health effects that this is going to have on all of us, right? But if you are coming from a starting point that many of our neurodivergent team members and community say, I don't feel a part of something, and now we're trying to do this over Zoom, right? Let's have virtual coffee together instead of having real coffee together. Two, I'm not understood. And who's going to take time to make sure that they really understand me and where I'm coming from? I think some of these challenges have gotten harder. We know that the disabilities community in general has always had 4 or more X unemployment or underemployment. The neurodivergent community, as a segment of the disabilities community, has even greater levels of unemployment or underemployment. And so I think the pandemic it's like a double-edged sword. There's a downside because you can feel like you're getting compressed or depressed even further. There's an upside where we're now hearing, and by virtue of being on this conversation with you, much greater awareness and attention to a diverse population that you cannot see. You will only know if someone trusts you enough to tell you this.
And so there are a lot of the topic of diversity in general, for me, is a very complex topic. And there's been so much attention and focus over the last couple of years. Companies seem to be pouring money into diversity. but there's now a greater expectation that there's going to be action. There's going to be meaningful results that are coming out of this investment that companies are making. And so with all these different components of diversity, what is so important about neurodiversity? Why do you feel like this is the segment that really deserves to have a light cast on it?
I think traditionally the neurodivergent community has not been acknowledged and recognized. So if you think about physical disabilities or physical diverse abilities, right? Somebody's different, race, age, color, disclosure of sexual orientation, all of these things have received tremendous support and attention. It's really interesting in our organizations today, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, we already have neurodivergent individuals. It's just that we may not have known this, right? So one reason it's important, Stephen, is not just as a nice hiring program, it's a recognition, organization, leader, you already have neurodivergent individuals on your team. And frankly, some organizations more so than others, but you already have this population. So are you taking care of them? Are you seeing them? Are you helping to amplify their unique capabilities? Now, this gets to the second piece of why I think neurodiversity is so important. You know, when I started out this journey, there was a imperative around accessing and creating innovation capacity, which means creativity, complex problem solving, the ability to see around the corner, maybe new angles of perspective, and then the ability to harness the power of data and emerging technology like artificial intelligence and such. Now, every single organization today, public, private, industry, sector, geography, are all thinking about these things, right? They need this agile and resilient workforce. They need to innovate. They need to transform. And I think, Stephen, the opportunity with this overlooked, undersupported community that, boy, you tap into this, you are unlocking a wealth of potential. And frankly, it becomes a belonging and equity amplifier because the neurodivergent community cuts across every segment of diversity that you have: race, age, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic class. And so effectively, you get this beautiful cascading effect. You're maybe focusing on one area, but the universal design and application and amplification, that opportunity is tremendous. And that's why we feel so strongly, and I do, about investing in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, your comment earlier that this segment of the workforce you mentioned is invisible. And I think that is a really interesting way of framing this topic. And in many ways, you know, that you're doubling down on a lot of different things that your company is probably trying to achieve, right? You already have an effort to create a more inclusive work environment. You're already, you know, trying to understand, are we creating a psychologically safe environment for our people? And so this work is at the nexus of a lot of HR initiatives, and it also provides some what I would consider some quick wins. To your point, these are employees that are all this is existing, you know, part of your workforce, your employee base that is being underserved. And not only that, but I can't tell you the number of times that we've interviewed chief people officers, you know, heads of HR that are complaining on how difficult it is to find technical talent and compete in this labor market. And so this is like a win-win-win, if I'm hearing you right.
100%. I mean, you know, Stephen, when we tell people things that over the last 6.5 years, this programmatic effort that I lead at EY, that is now in 14 cities around the world in 7 countries, is at 90+% retention, where we're bringing in individuals who are helping solve complex problems through an extremely creative lens, process optimization and artificial intelligence, cybersecurity and blockchain and data analytics. These are the hardest skills to find, to grow, and retain. But Stephen, the sense of transformation is not only at the organizational level, you're impacting the communities you live in. And you think about your workforce, your neighbors, your family, and that cascading effect of creating value at the community level. This is what organizations are going to be judged on. In fact, we know at the World Economic Forum and using the UN Sustainable Development Goals, organizations now have to disclose their value for stakeholders and not just for shareholders. So to your point, words of commitment are nice. Action is what's needed at the end. And this is the bridge to say, we're not asking you to write a check because it's charitable and nice to do. We're asking you to make an investment for which that return on investment will be 10x at the end of the day. And that's where the win-win-win comes in. And lastly, I would say the neurodivergent community and individuals who have great talent, but not have had access to equal opportunity. When you impact that life and that person gets married and buys a house and all these things that we're seeing our team members do, we say, wow, I as an individual and me and our corporate and our organization, we're really making a difference in the world. Like that gets you up every morning.
Well, you certainly have this topic, and the work that you've done has gotten attention from some pretty big names out there. I think we talked about SAP, ServiceNow, Procter and Gamble, Goldman Sachs. Like there are very, Fortune 100 companies that are now really looking at this opportunity. Why do you think they have, what's factored into this decision? Like from thinking that this is like, okay, I see the ROI, I see the impact to the community, to like, okay, we're now going to go hard in the paint on investing in this initiative.
Yeah, Stephen, it's been so interesting that the conversation that most people would defaultly think, oh, this is a conversation with the person that leads our corporate social responsibility effort or philanthropic effort. Or this is a conversation with your chief HR officer or the person that leads people, or this is with our persons with disabilities group. And that conversation has now pivoted and shifted towards the CIO, Chief Information Security Officer, who's in charge of analytics, who's driving transformation efforts, because it's the demand side that said, wait a minute, we're struggling not only with people, we don't want warm bodies. We need people who will accelerate our journey, meaning we're learning and applying really quickly, but we're challenging status quo, we're challenging process, and then we're rapidly building new models which our company will benefit from, our customers will benefit from. So, Stephen, it's interesting. My friends at Procter & Gamble, at Wells Fargo, at ServiceNow, and so many other companies, Microsoft, we've all leaned in on this because we have a legitimate business need to do so. And we realize the greater we lean into being a purpose-driven organization, the greater we will distinguish our brand, we'll deepen our relationships, and all of this will have top line and bottom line and community line impact at the end of the day. So this is, I think, part of the reason why this is no longer nice to do. I'll do it when I have time. That is a winning strategy that I'm committed to as a leader.
Yeah, and the fact that you can even include, those three letters ROI in this topic, I think that has been something very difficult to nail down with respect to diversity in general. Like, we get it, this makes sense, it's the right thing to do, but what's the return? What are we really going to get out of this? And that's one of the I guess, distinctive aspects of this conversation. But I have to imagine that not everyone has been totally sold, off the bat. And so what's some of the typical pushback that you've heard from companies that were interested but not totally sold on this?
Yeah, this is a extremely important question, because the default understanding, the default perception, anytime someone starts talking about this, they think we're talking about deficits and only disabilities.
Mhm.
And it takes a lot of being able to shift your mindset, to shift the frame, to talk about strengths and unique contributions. And so some of the challenges we face is default in perception, because for example, the autism spectrum really is a spectrum. There's low needs individuals, there's high needs individuals, there's folks that are in between. They call it, Stephen, a very spiky profile, which means I'm really good at certain things, but boy, I struggle with other things. And we don't want to fix anybody, and we're not trying to assimilate anybody. And that is something that organizations, large organizations, have a hard time reconciling, because they're used to building mass workforces. They're built to allowing individuals to create that parity of the same type of person. Whereas we're actually saying, you want to retain the spikiness, you want to retain that uniqueness. An organization, this is going to be hard, because you're going to hear things like I heard that said, I know that was well-meaning, but that didn't work for me, and here's why. And I found this to be refreshing, because we want transparency. We need to add velocity. And that bridge from where an organization is grounded, where its commitment to community or disabilities is often not in the space of business imperative. And so that's some of the pushback that we've seen. And the other part is, look, we're really honest. The neurodivergent population is of all different kinds of people. And it all depends whether it's my friends in Florida at Rising Tide Car Wash, who run the entire car wash with individuals on the spectrum. And what's beautiful is they have a lower accident rate and a highest efficiency rate of any car wash, I think, that we've ever seen before, because they stick to process so well. But you've got that level to cybersecurity and artificial intelligence engineers, right? And it's and sometimes people and companies have a hard time distinguishing between these populations.
And I think that that's a natural, I mean, I think that that's an understandable concern. It's interesting. We had Cleo Knowles on our sister podcast, The Modern People Leader, and Cleo she was the head of HR for Virgin Hotels. She's now moved on to a new organization, but this was one of their top initiatives during the peak pandemic period, because there were a variety of different roles that they could offer neurodiverse talent. And to your point, it is a spectrum, and there are going to be certain tasks and job responsibilities that are going to be very straightforward and repeatable, and thus, align well. And then there are skills that are not, and because of the nature of the jobs that they had in the hotel industry, it was very easy to create matches that would ensure success. And so I think that that's an example in my side, in my community, that where I've heard of a practical investment that led to success. But the second point that I wanted to just quickly touch on is your point around how organizations build HR these days. Yes. And I forget who it was, but in my LinkedIn, there's a head of HR that was like, if I'm asked again whether or not this initiative is scalable, like I'm gonna go crazy, because it seems like if a process is not scalable, then it should not garner attention. Although I think that's a very closed-minded way of looking at, the realm of opportunities. And so, in this instance, this is almost the antithesis of scale, right? Because we're not trying to create a cookie cutter approach. We're trying to create an approach that is tailored to, different individuals. And so how have you seen companies balance that?
Yeah, it's great question. When we think about, and we had to basically deconstruct the problem statement. Why is there 80 to 85% unemployment or underemployment for this neurodivergent community? What is happening? And as we went through the process, and I'm giving you live examples, hired a person who was driving an Uber, delivering pizzas, working as a janitor, all honorable jobs, hardworking, right, with dignity, except the person who was delivering pizzas had a data science background, and 3 weeks after stopping delivering pizzas was not only writing, but correcting machine learning algorithms at my company. Okay, this is, if I didn't see this, I wouldn't believe it, okay? And so when we deconstructed the problem, we realized that organizational processes today, like the interview process, which is a behavioral-based process, right? We sit across the screen and we're asked random questions. We're never given the questions in advance, and we have to be smart and witty and build rapport. What happens if I'm not making eye contact with the interviewer? They're going to say, wow, that guy was really smart. His resume was great. Something, I just didn't feel it, right?
Socially awkward.
Yes.
Or not, yeah,
right,
doesn't fit in our culture.
Yeah, and we would look at job descriptions and say, this job description is the kitchen sink. You're looking for a data scientist with great technical skills, and they have to be a great communicator. Who cares if they can communicate or not, right? Like what? And so we started to boil down job descriptions, but we looked at organizational processes to say there are inherently barriers that we have built by neurotypicals for neurotypicals, which means we are completely oblivious to there are people who don't fit that mold, who will not succeed in that scenario. And how do we go more towards a performance-based observation process that takes 7 days to do this, okay? Most companies will say, Stephen, I don't have 7 days. I need to hire people now. And we say, would you like 92% retention? And they say, yep. I'm like, well, then you're going to have to do this. And we learned, Stephen, that those changes, those tweaks we're making, this is no shock. The communication clarity that we now provide, are other people, other segments of the workforce say, I want that. Can you give me that level of support? I'm not neurodivergent, but boy, I struggle sometimes with the unspoken rules and protocol in our organization. And so we're finding you may think about this as a bespoke focus and application. The universal application potential is massive here. I mean, it's massive, but it is challenging the way companies have traditionally done things.
And so remind me some of the ROI, I guess, studies that you guys have done, because the numbers are pretty astounding. So can you share some of the details that you've shared with me offline in terms of some of the real benefits that companies are getting?
And Steve, thank you for asking this question, because without quantifying this, without an ROI number, it always just sounds like a great conversation. Oh, I feel so good about it. And then I go home and like, I got to go back to work now. Like, wait a minute.
Well, I know that the brands that you just listed off is the partners that you've worked with, they are compelled by a lot of things, but they are particularly compelled by dollar signs. So if there is an ROI, like I know it, it takes something to get those names, to get those brands' attention. And so I'm curious to learn more, like what your debrief studies have found.
Yeah, those are 4 of the 65 plus that allow me to use their names publicly, and they're proud, right, of this. But 90+% retention. This is EY, this is Microsoft, this is JP Morgan Chase, this is SAP. I mean, we're talking brands that have been in this for 7+ years. So this is not a fluke on retention. That's number 1. 2, our team, the one I lead at EY, has created process and product that has now accelerated processes within EY and our clients' organizations to the tune of 3.5 million hours that we've now looked at processes and say, there's a better way to do that process, crashed it and said, hey, we're going to build a new way that you can execute that process, and freed up 3.5 million hours of human capacity. And last but not least, the stat that really gets people's attention is when you think about that ESG agenda and the social pillar, how much value are we creating for stakeholders, not just shareholders? Stephen, it's about $1 billion right now in value. I mean,
$1 billion
with a B, yeah. and this is unheard of. We would have never projected. We never had a target. We didn't know where we were going. We didn't know what it would do. 14 cities around the world, ecosystems built with government, academia, nonprofits, self-advocacy groups. And we bring other business into this because we say, this is a collaborative opportunity. We estimate 120 to 160 million people around the world that fit this profile that we would look for to hire. And when we think about this, we say, we're not going to hire everybody anyway. So how do we bring the best value? Well, we get our friends at Procter & Gamble and at ServiceNow and others to lean in on this with us. So we create collaborative and collective value as opposed to competitive value. And this is where we see the power of thinking differently. We like to call it transformative thinking, where you're looking at a product or process and you say, hey, did you think about doing it this way? And Stephen, I give you one quick example. We hired our first 4 team members in Philadelphia in March of 2016. In that first week of onboarding them, they noticed a mistake in the onboarding that we first didn't believe them because we said, we hire 60,000 people a year. If there was a mistake in onboarding, we would have known it already. That attention to detail identified 25,000 hours of work that we then saved, and literally came from a tiny nuance that no one had ever brought up before.
Well, and what boggles my mind is you can't open your LinkedIn feed without seeing a post on diversity, some posts on diversity, right? Or an influencer posting about, whatever.
Yeah.
Less than 5% of those posts relate to neurodiversity. In fact, I reached out to you on the back of, what I shared in the intro. This topic came up in our last live podcast recording. And I realized wow, this is actually something I don't know a lot about. Turns out that it's Autism Awareness Month. So great. We connected. And, even on the poll that we did, less than 10%, if the audience is reflective of the broader kind of corporate world, we're talking less than 10% of companies that are focusing on this. And, and there is a clear ROI statement. Now, that leads me to think, well, maybe my company should look into this, but I'm not Procter & Gamble. I'm not even ServiceNow or JP Morgan, right? I mean, those brands are crazy big. So, I'm curious, what can the smaller companies do? Is this all about a big spend, big budget, big investment to see the ROI? Are there kind of scrappy ways that companies can start investing and, tapping in to the opportunity here?
Stephen, this is definitely not a big company thing. That happens to be where I focus on, but the small and medium-sized businesses have an opportunity today to work with existing components of their community. Let me tell you who they are. State and local government, its workforce commission, and its vocational rehab agencies. These 2 government focus areas, state and local, already are working with this workforce, and they're trying to match individuals with job readiness skills into actual jobs. So I mentioned my friends at Rising Tide Car Wash. So this has already been proven. So one avenue is working with your state and local agencies that are using taxpayer dollars today to try to find meaningful work for such individuals. So that's one. Secondly, there are nonprofits today, and frankly, EY would not have been able to stand up anything without the amazing nonprofit and NGO company organizations around the world that have investing tremendous sweat equity in this area. And I think that is an amazing opportunity to not just write a check to one of these nonprofits, but to say, what if we were to work together? Could we support and bridge those individuals to be successful, whether it's in our grocery store, whether it's in our warehousing, whether it's in a retail space, but there's all of these opportunities that already exist for which I think small and medium-sized companies can dip into, as long as they can shift this perspective from, have we crafted the roles in a way that allow these individuals to be successful? And two, are we providing ongoing support that they may need? And it could be that this person has never had a full-time job anymore. Time management becomes a critical executive function that you have to do. So I think that those investments have produced tremendous retention rates, even at the small and medium-sized level. And again, we know that the workforce is shrinking, the demographics are changing, it's hard to find people. I went to a restaurant the other day and the folks behind the counter said to me, the cashier didn't come in today, so we're only taking online orders. And I said, okay, well, I'm glad I ordered online, but this is actual issues that we have in our community today that I think small and medium-sized businesses should really look into.
Love it. Love it. For me, when there are practical applications of these kind of big corporate initiatives, like that's where, that's what gets me excited the most as, the CEO of a small company. And so it's time, these conversations go really, really quickly. And it's time to open it up to the Ask Me Anything portion of the conversation. In the chat earlier, I just reminded everyone to shoot the questions over here. We've already received a few. And so I'm going to pivot into the question. So the first question from anonymous attendee is, earlier you mentioned that this is an invisible group of, the workforce. How do I begin to understand, the neurodiverse talent that I have at my company? And I think this relates to existing.
That's an amazing question. The first thing is someone talking about this. That's the question. Is somebody framing this in a way that does not have to be connected to disabilities or mental health, but talking about, hey, we believe that there is a neurodivergent population. We want to talk about what this is. We want to talk about maybe how we can help support it. I think talking about it, acknowledging it, allows the space for people to come forward. As we've seen, our self-disclosure rates right now are higher than they've ever been. Why? Because we're talking about it. And when we do, somebody says, oh, you opened that door for the conversation. And so I think that leads to what we've now seen with many companies starting small employee resource groups. So it's not just a overall disabilities or persons with disabilities umbrella group, but it's a subset of these groups. And it's a,
so like there would be an African-American or Latino or women's network. You're saying there would be an ERG for the neurodivergent group. Okay.
And I think the community and camaraderie that you build, the safe space there, why are ERGs so powerful, right? That's what they bring. And so I think talking about it, calling on others, and there's a lot of literature, a lot of great organizations that are willing to come and help you have this conversation. I'm willing to very well help you have this conversation, but I think talking about it, empowering your employee workforce to say, we want to be better, we want to support you, and we don't want you to do something that, which I hear, Stephen, is really hard for the neurodivergent community, which is they call masking or pretending. You have to literally say, well, I'm going to try and act like everybody else. And Stephen, one of my team members said to me, here and I have trained myself to make eye contact, but it's excruciating. And it broke my heart. And two, I realized from now on, every time I speak to him, I look over his left shoulder. And this is the permission that costs nothing. It's not even a formal accommodation, but it allows somebody to say, it's okay if I don't make eye contact.
All great. All great. I have nothing to add there. The next question, also anonymous attendee, From a talent acquisition perspective, how can you begin the process identifying which roles would be a good fit for this neurodivergent talent base?
Yeah, I love this question because the traditional route, if I'm understanding the basis of this question, is let me figure out the roles that I believe this population would be a good fit for. And
I agree. I think that's the spirit of the question.
That's the spirit, right? It was really interesting, Stephen. As a naive professional, I went the other route. I said, what are the skills I need? And then where am I going to find this, right? And so it was interesting. I didn't go with how do I craft a role to these individuals. I went the other way. What do I need in an organization that is sustainable, it's scalable, it's mature, there's process documentation behind it, there's learning paths behind this. And if I can identify those roles, and obviously we're talking more likely than not, if it's entry, it's at a junior level, neurodivergent individuals can do any kind of a job. We have senior leaders at EY who are openly neurodivergent. Richard Branson, Elon Musk are two individuals, by the way, who are most famously openly neurodivergent. So creativity, complex problem solving, marketing, business development, finance, there's any kinds of jobs that these individuals can do. And frankly, they're probably already doing them. So yeah. I think, Stephen, the way to the question is really flipping it around. And where we find the greatest success is where there is initially more structure around that role is where you can then source those right competencies from the neurodivergent community. And it could be any kind of job.
Love it. Love it. Let's keep moving. Let's keep moving. There are a few more. Next question from an anonymous attendee. As I look to broaden my diversity offerings, what trainings do you recommend providing to our employees related to this topic?
Yeah, I think the first part of the training is awareness. Stephen, as you hit on at the beginning and our survey showed, a lot of people don't know what this is. And so we're starting with the basics. What are we talking about and why are we talking? And so we've always gone through this 4-step process, whether it's different countries, like when we went to India to launch, or in Warsaw, Poland, or in Madrid, Spain.
And I've noticed that. I've noticed that E&Y, you guys seem to be taking a market-driven approach. Is that, that's for a specific reason? That might be what you're trying to explain to us.
No, Stephen,
I have noticed that in your LinkedIn.
You hit on, we're going with where's the business need? Where's the need for talent? Forget about what kind of talent it is. Where's the need? And now let's say, where's the supply and the support structures in those communities that we may have to help build? We may have to help coalesce and bring together. And I think all of this starts with awareness and education. And I think as a diversity effort, I think first talking about this, and then lastly, bring others in who've already done this. And I do so many of these types of discussions because we say, you don't have to prove this out for the first time. 100 other companies have already done this, and there are employer roundtables, and there's all these other things that exist that you can then piggyback off. But I think educating your workforce, what are we talking about, and why are we celebrating this segment of diversity, and why will that make us a better organization, both at a cultural perspective and as a outcomes perspective?
Love it. Love it. Next question, moving on. I told you this was going to be rapid fire, so hopefully this isn't too rapid for you.
All good.
The next question is, hold on, I'm just scrolling through. The next question is around another programmatic related question. Have you seen certain programs that are more effective for particular industries? So I think what this question is getting at is there an industry lens that you should be looking at as well?
No industry lens. As you're hearing from me, retail, technology, consumer products, small, medium-sized business, the car wash that I keep mentioning, right? There is no, and this is the crazy part, Steve. People didn't believe us first, and we said, we think this is applied everywhere. And we had to say, well, first prove it. And so there is no industry, geographic, sector limitation or constraint. That's the craziest part about all this. That I think that's the beautiful
it almost seems too good to be true. That's
right.
what.
That's right.
And so how, I have to imagine that, going back to the question earlier around, obstacles and barriers, that are there some people that do think this is too good to be true?
Yeah. I think many say, oh, we already are involved in neurodiversity. And we say, oh, how? And the response is, we support the local nonprofit in that. Or we do have an employee resource group around this. Or we do celebrate April as Autism Awareness Month. But we say, but have you taken it a step further? And so the challenge and the pushback is the framing of this opportunity. Do you understand that we're not talking just about culture, but we're talking about business results and outcomes that you can drive that create greater, that are created by greater agility and resiliency in your organization? And so I think that's a leap, Stephen. A lot of folks say, I don't get it. I don't get that leap. And I'm satisfied with what we're doing right now. And then the question always is, are you not having a sense of urgency around transformation efforts? Are you not having a sense of urgency on your strategic workforce efforts? So all of these will continue conversations that will either, I think, early adopters come in. We're seeing now more of the mass market getting engaged in this conversation.
In related to that, because, transformation, it takes an entire company, to make a transformation successful, right? Yeah. And in this, you've got HR that has a role in the transformation. You've got hiring managers that are also playing a role in this. And so, how have you seen that relationship work, for the companies that are new at this, right? Is it like a joint effort between does it start with a joint effort between, say, the IT department and HR, like working together? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, Stephen, this is exactly the orchestration and the agility that we're seeing when a company says, everyone says we want to be a flat organization. Well, the implication of being a flat organization means you're kind of working in a matrix style, right? And that orchestration is not easy for some cultures and some companies. It's really hard, but it is, in your words, what you just said. This is where we say we need the business at the table. So wherever the roles are going, we need HR, we need diversity and inclusion. We need your communications folks at the table. We need your learning and development folks. And instead of transformation efforts being this massive tsunami that is supposed to, drive massive change, we say, let's start really small. Let's start targeted and let the results amplify from there. And so it's a different approach to transformation, almost from the inside out.
Let the results speak for itself and take the movement forward. Well, the last question is more of a comment, and it's, a thank you for thanking the two of us for spending time today on this topic. And Hiren, I'm just so thrilled that we could have you on to talk about something that I believe, will provide companies with a huge ROI with respect to a people problem that is a real problem, today in terms of, the ability to attract top talent. It's also been a lot of fun to reconnect with you after all of these years. And so I can't thank you enough. If people are looking for more resources on the topic, is there anywhere that you would direct them?
Yeah, a couple of places. So with my friends at Microsoft and SAP and JP Morgan Chase, we launched a employer roundtable. It is through the Disability in IN website. If you Google Disability in Employer Roundtable, Neurodiversity Employer Roundtable, you'll bring up a whole bunch of things. There's a playbook in there University of Washington did. There's articles. We've now set up a career connector, so it's like an e-marketplace. But if you go there, let me know. And then if anybody wants to
I didn't realize there was so much. And so what I'll do for our audience that we're frantically trying to write all of that down, we will actually share these resources as a follow-up with you all, as well as providing you with Hiren's contact information. I can't thank you enough, but unfortunately it's time to close the call for today. But thanks again, Hiren. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Stephen. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.